came out here with a contract. I needed the dough. And I'm going to collect every nasty little cent of it. Maybe more.
Now, look, baby, I'm not trying to rush you.
Silly boy.
I was crazy about Ida. Ida Lupino was something. She liked to shake things up.
If this is a sample of your work, you're not very good at pickups.
Anything you asked her to do or wanted her to do, she could do it. Serious, comedic, lightweight, heavy.
Picture? What do I care about your picture? I hate you, do you understand? I hate you.
It was very irritating. She could write, she knew she could direct. She had all the capacities to be a producer. She had an amazing mind.
She's best remembered as the gorgeous, tough-talking dame who personified the 40s femme fatale. But few know of her accomplishments behind the camera, or that this fearless pioneer marked more milestones in American cinema and television than any woman before her, and very few since. Yet curiously, Ida Lupino has been overlooked, and her legend remains one of Hollywood's best-kept secrets. London, England, a city rich in history, rich in tradition, was struggling to rise from the ashes of World War I when Ida Lupino was born on February 4th, 1918. For generations, Ida's family had been part of an acting dynasty, which began in an era of acrobats, puppeteers, and tightrope walkers. Entertainment was the family business, passed down through each generation. Every Lupino was expected to take his or her place as a performer and carry on the proud tradition.
I guess you could say that's a lot of strong karma to come from a family where every single person in the family for 300 years was an entertainer in one form or another. They immigrated to England probably around 250, 300 years ago. And there they became Shakespearean actors. They were kind of a band of traveling gypsies who were puppeteers and circus performers and kind of bards that went around entertaining people across the countrysides.
By the time Ida was born, her father, Stanley Lupino, was among the most eminent musical comedy stars of his day. Her mother, known on stage as Connie Emerald, was once billed as the fastest tap dancer alive.
They were an extremely ambitious family, and I mean that as a compliment. They had great following and a long tenure, and they were important.
Ida grew up on a grand estate just outside London. There she loved playing make-believe in the lush gardens. Even before she was old enough to attend school, her grandfather was teaching her to sing and dance, recite Shakespeare, and appreciate the classics. The arrival of a sister, Rita, supplied Ida with a welcome playmate. But in 1925, Stanley and Connie were spending so much time on the road that they sent their daughters off to a posh boarding school. Accustomed to the company of adults, 7-year-old Ida withdrew into the familiar world of make-believe, consoling herself by writing and starring in a student play.
She seemed to think school was a lot of suffering. She didn't feel like a duck in water with academia. She already had that artist spirit.
Ida's artistic accomplishments impressed her father. Eager to showcase his 10-year-old daughter's talents, he built a professional theater and began preparing her for a life on stage.
He pushed her. He groomed her to be an actress. She was supposed to carry on the Lupino legacy of acting. This was her destiny, whether she liked it or not, to be an actress.
Furthering his plans to mold his daughter's future, Stanley urged her to audition for the prestigious Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. Only 13, Ida passed herself off as 15, the minimum age for enrollment, and was accepted. Any semblance of childhood was now a thing of the past.
My mother grew up thinking she should just accommodate everybody. Her father, of course, was one of the premier people she felt she had to accommodate.
She really
always, always wanted his approval and felt that she got it, but you see, she really only got it as an actress.
By 1932, the cinema had emerged as the most popular form of entertainment. And in addition to her studies, Ida was encouraged to find work as an extra in films, which provided an excellent training ground for the young actress. The 14-year-old moved into a small flat in London to accommodate her grueling schedule. Ida's outward appearance belied the fact that she was still an innocent child, so her mother stuck protectively close by.
My grandmother and my mother were best friends. They were like sisters, I would say, more than mother and daughter.
The two looked so much alike that in 1932, when the prolific American film director Alan Dwan was auditioning Connie, he took one look at her tag-along daughter and insisted she screen test instead. The result was Ida's first starring role in Her First Affair, and over the next year, she became a popular favorite, starring in a string of insignificant films as a precocious seductress.
What was?
A man. He was here in my room.
A man? What did he look like?
I don't know. I was so frightened I shut my eyes. And when I opened them again, he was going out of the window.
It's all right. No. Calm yourself. Now, keep calm. It'll be all right now.
She was 14 years old, and she looked like she was 23, 25, and she had to play a vamp with this bleach blonde hair and all this makeup, and she was extremely glamorous.
One time, she played with Ivan Novello, who was her godfather, and she's playing a prostitute in a scene with him where she vamps him. And she got enormous reviews out of that, but she's 14 years old.
Over the next year, Stanley encouraged Ida to take whatever roles were offered. The parts were not what the classically trained Lupino had been groomed for, and yet she emerged on the fast track to stardom. In 1933, Hollywood was recognized as the Mecca of filmmaking. So when an offer came for the promising young actress to cross the sea, her father pressed her to seize the opportunity. At 15, Ida Lupino signed a 6-month contract with Paramount Studios, and she and her mother set sail for America. Hollywood was at its most glorious when Ida arrived. A sunny paradise full of promise, populated by celestial beings called movie stars who glided effortlessly between nightclubs and premieres. When studio executives finally met 15-year-old Ida in the flesh, they shifted into high gear. Quickly exploiting the sexy bombshell, they thrust her onto the publicity treadmill and a rigorous schedule in B films.
It was the custom of the time to try and change any young girl who came along into being Jean Harlow, and it certainly didn't work, you know. But there were so many that were had to wade through that offense.
Paramount was banking on Ida's sex appeal, not on her talent, and the young actress was becoming angry. She was, after all, a Lupino, and yet in America she was just another painted doll, barely distinguishable from dozens of other contract players.
On all sides, people responded to her being the bad girl, which was another word for saying little slut. And the other part of her, which was so very, really retiring and modest, those two parts of her nature were always at war. But one brought her acclaim, and the other one brought her a lot of pain.
Ida trusted the studio when they promised her a slate of more serious work, and so when her contract came up for renewal, she signed. Cleopatra was expected to be the hot film of 1934. But when Ida was assigned the demeaning part of a servant waving a fan over Claudette Colbert's head, the frustrated actress flat out refused. Learning the pitfalls of the studio system the hard way, Ida was put on suspension, a scant 2 years after her arrival.
She just didn't know any better, and she was young, and she had this natural courageousness that was coupled with a fear. And this natural talent was the energy force that drove her.
At the tender age of 17, a war was beginning to rage inside Ida, who was torn between her desire to fulfill her father's dreams at any cost and her need to succeed on her own terms. Hollywood was destined to be her battleground. Ida Lupino was only 17 and already on suspension. But the young rebel surprised studio executives when she pleaded with them to cast her in a small but important role in the classically inspired Peter Ibbotson.
Más pas, n'est-ce pas?
Why don't you try telling me in English?
Oh, you're English.
Rather. I knew you was English. I've been watching you sitting over there. Look, I'll be through my turn here in a bit. Wait for me.
Why not?
Really? Peter.
Praise for her performance invigorated Ida. Believing that Paramount would now view her as a serious actress, she signed a new contract and was earning a whopping $1,750 a week in the middle of the Depression. However, the studio was unable to find another meaty role for their anxious teenage actress. Worried about being typecast as the blonde vixen and angered by her situation, Ida was subject to fits of depression and sleepless nights. Her worst fears were realized when the studio plunged her into yet another succession of B movies.
They gave her what she considered insignificant parts in superficial movies. She suffered over not having a real way to express herself as an actress to the greatness that she really had.
In 1937, while filming Artists and Models, Ida met Hedda Hopper, the powerful Hollywood columnist, who took the 19-year-old aside and told her that she might be taken more seriously if she didn't look like a hussy. When she followed Hopper's advice and let her hair go natural, her eyebrows grow in, and shed her baby fat, her artificial image disappeared, and the real Ida Lupino emerged. With her new look came a fresh confidence and steely determination. Ida did not accept Paramount's offer when her contract was due for renewal, but she did accept a proposal of marriage from a handsome, sophisticated actor, Louis Hayward, whom she married on November 17, 1938. The newlyweds seemed content to work sporadically and enjoy the simple pleasures of domestic life. But when word spread that Wild Bill Wellman would be directing The Light That Failed, she launched a campaign to win the small but electric role of a Cockney trollop.
Keep your chin up.
Don't let him hit me, sir. Please don't.
Don't be afraid. He's not going to hit you. He's an artist. I want to draw your head.
What for?
Because it's pretty. That's why I'm willing to pay you £3 a week just for sitting still and being drawn. Here's a quid on account.
For nothing? Aren't you afraid I'll cheat you?
I'm sure you will.
That part was, of course, as important to her career as Human Bondage had been to Betty Davis. And The Light That Failed gave Ida that part that she could fill all corners of its room. She was shot right out of the screen.
Come on, Bessie, throw your head back and laugh. Come on, laugh, Bessie, laugh!
The highlight of the film was the daring mad scene. Ida's fearless abandonment of herself revealed her character's inner demons and created a performance so raw and vulnerable, it is almost uncomfortable to watch.
I can't laugh anymore.
Top's coming home today. Think of that.
I can't stand it. I'll kill you if you don't let me out of here.
Just as she hoped, Ida's performance brought her the type of prestige she longed for as an actress and as a Lupino. After appearing in 20 films, the New York Times reported, a little ingenue suddenly bursts forth as a great actress. Warner Brothers, eager to acquire the new hot property, wasted no time signing Ida. Reinventing herself once again, Ida set a new standard for the hard-boiled, tough-talking dame in They Drive By Night, directed by Raoul Walsh and co-starring George Raft and Humphrey Bogart.
Well, you're not getting out. You belong with me and you're gonna stay with me. Only you're not going off marrying that cheap redhead.
I'm marrying Cassie, and I'm not asking anybody what they think about it. That includes you.
She hasn't any right to you. You're mine.
The audience response to the gutsy performance was phenomenal, and critics praised her extraordinary power, calling her the outstanding performer of the film. Warner Brothers immediately re-teamed her with Walsh and Bogart in High Sierra, although this time it was Ida Lupino who received top billing.
She played really hard characters, but there always was that feminine vulnerability in what she did.
Oh, Roy, please don't send me back to LA. Let me stay. I want to be with you, Roy. Please let me stay, please.
High Sierra was a hit, and even though Warner Brothers was paying Ida an astonishing $3,000 a week, they were not capitalizing on their star's growing popularity.
Professionally, she had tremendous competition, especially being on the same lot as Bette Davis. She was like a backup for Bette Davis. All the studios had that system. But in a sense, it's interesting to wonder what might have happened for Ida if she had been on another campus than Warner Brothers.
Disgusted with the studio system, Ida's temper exploded, and Warner Brothers responded by placing her on suspension. The temperamental actress's difficult reputation was now fodder for industry gossip. But her problems didn't end on the lot. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and Ida's husband, Louis, immediately enlisted in the Marines. Alone and out of work at 25, Ida found herself on a downward spiral. Desperate for something to hold on to, she accepted a potentially risky role as the jaded and power-hungry Helen in The Hard Way, to be directed by Vincent Sherman.
We were having battles all during the picture. She felt that she was playing a miserable bitch and the audiences would hate her and so forth and so on. One day on the set, as I was driving Ida to play the scenes in a certain way, she turned in front of the crew and to me and she said, "This picture's gonna stink and I'm gonna stink in it."
Despite Ida's fears, the role earned her enormous critical acclaim. Audiences did indeed hate the bitter Helen Chernin, but they applauded the actress who created her.
How else can you get along? By being soft, honest? No. You've got to fight. You've got to scheme and double-cross to get ahead in this business.
She was a real warrior woman. Nobody could touch her. But then the minute that situation would end and the lights would dim and she'd have to sit alone with herself or see herself in the mirror, she'd start checking herself. And this fear would come crashing down on her. I'm not good enough. I'll never work again. Perhaps I'm not pretty enough.
In June of 1942, Ida was devastated when she received word that her father had died of cancer in London. Stanley Lupino, the king of English musical comedy, was dead at the age of 48. When she won the New York Film Critics Award for her role in The Hard Way, it was a poignant reminder that Ida was indeed the keeper of the Lupino flame. Just 1 year later, Louis returned home from the war, but he was no longer the man she had married.
When he came back, she really wanted to stay home and take care of him. But he was having severe mental problems from the war, and he asked her to divorce him, and she was devastated.
After 6 years of marriage, the Haywards divorced. The pain of losing her husband and her father was more than she could bear, and Ida fell into a deep depression. Still, she managed to complete her contract with Warner Brothers, but when the studio demanded she sign an exclusive long-term deal, Ida had had enough and walked off the lot for good. At 27 years old, Ida Lupino was on her own and free to make her own choices. But as she would soon discover, her true destiny had yet to unfold.
Hi.
Hello.
In 1948, 30-year-old Ida Lupino starred as the tough-talking Lily in Roadhouse. She was by now one of Hollywood's favorite femme fatales.
You know something? You're stupid.
Now look.
Doesn't it ever enter a man's head that a woman can do without him? Listen, all I wanted to do was just hang around with somebody on a dull Sunday. I get that low sometimes, so you just skip it. Hop in your little boat, paddle off. Me, I'll go back to the alley.
Ida had surpassed her father's dreams and was the most famous Lupino ever. But despite her success as an actress, Ida was growing restless. For years, she had been writing screenplays and short stories, composing music, searching for direction among a myriad of possibilities.
She was bubbling over all the time with ideas and projects. There was immense industry in Ida. I mean, I always wondered when she slept, you know, because she was so multifaceted.
Ida's passion and intellect attracted a sophisticated studio executive named Collier Young. The two had much in common, including a dream of one day bucking the Hollywood system and starting their own independent film company. While planning a future together in business, the two fell in love, and they were married on August 5th, 1948.
Collier Young was probably the best husband Ida could have had. They shared an interest in filmmaking, in discovering new talent, developing it, writing the scripts, and producing.
The newlyweds wasted no time in making their dreams a reality. They founded Emerald Productions and set out to break new ground for independent filmmakers.
You do a more personal film usually as an independent filmmaker because you really aren't trying even to appeal to as large an audience as the studio feels obligated to. And there's so much room for expression.
The following year, Emerald Productions launched its first feature, Not Wanted, co-produced and co-written by Ida. Risking public backlash by tackling a subject considered taboo, the film exposed a young woman's pain and alienation as she copes with an illegitimate pregnancy.
We were two people who knew what we were doing, remember? I never gave you any phony ideas about getting married and growing old together. That's something you got into your head. If I've hurt you, Sally, I'm sorry, but I've never lied to you. Now get that straight.
Thanks, Stu. I've got it straight. Thanks a lot.
On the third day of production, the director, Elmer Clifton, suffered a mild heart attack. With little money and a tight schedule, Ida was forced to take immediate action. In an unprecedented move, she stepped in as director.
Although I don't know that she had a conscious desire at that moment to be a director, but she'd really been studying it for years at Warner Brothers when she was on layoff, when she refused parts that she didn't like, when she sat there supposedly and did nothing. She went on the sets and learned everything she could from cameramen and from directors.
The year was 1949, and a female director was unheard of. As the rumors spread through a disbelieving Hollywood, the Daily News printed an eyewitness account proving that a woman was indeed at the helm.
Ida had to fight for everything. Even now, women have to be careful how much of their intellect they throw on the table, because that can be intimidating toward a lot of people. Well, then it was 10 times worse.
Not Wanted was a tremendous success. Costing a mere $150,000, it grossed an impressive $1 million for the small company. In 1950, Ida received the distinction of being the second woman to join the Screen Directors Guild, a prestigious union boasting 1,300 members, all male. The only previous female member had been Dorothy Arzner, who joined in 1938 and had made her last film in 1943, leaving Ida, at the time of her induction, the only working woman in the union.
She always had the eye of a director. She was always seeing everything through a camera lens. She was always observing and listening through a writer's ear. And she would steal. You know, she'd go, look at that expression, look at that lighting, listen to that story. Feel that emotion that just an everyday person can evoke in me. She took all these things that she observed and that touched her, and she eventually translated that into subjects to write about, subjects that were, in those days, highly controversial.
Times were changing in the 1950s. The economy was skyrocketing, and post-war America was feeling the effects of a new conservative trend. A witch hunt for communists was spreading throughout the country, and Hollywood became a target of America's growing paranoia.
I believe that 95% of the people in California are decent, honest American citizens. The Communist Party is a minority, but a dangerous minority.
While members of the creative community were being imprisoned and blacklisted, Ida and Collier would not allow themselves to be intimidated. The studios responded to events in Washington by playing it safer than ever. But Ida was determined that her films would continue to address socially relevant issues. In Outrage, Ida pushed conventional boundaries and forced the American public to confront the unspeakable.
I think it was the first American film that had ever dealt with the subject of rape. We had certain problems with the existing censorship office at the time, and as a matter of fact, you couldn't refer to it as rape. It was called criminal assault.
Those were totally unacceptable subjects to approach. She would have had to do them independently. I don't know how she got them distributed, really. But they were important subjects, and goodness knows she had the courage to take anything on.
Now recognized as rebels, Ida and Collie brazenly published a Declaration of Independence, which was printed in the Hollywood trade papers. It stated, "We independent producers must continue to explore new themes, try new ideas, and discover new creative talents."
Being an independent was the most important to her. Doing it her way and on her own company.
Stanley Lupino had groomed his daughter for success, and at 33 years of age, she had reached unprecedented heights. It appeared as though she had it all, but as the next decade would show, what her father had not prepared her for was the price of fame. By 1950, Ida Lupino had reached her goal of becoming an independent filmmaker. But with her success came the failure of her marriage to Collier. While the two remained friends and business partners, Ida began a passionate affair with actor Howard Duff, one of Hollywood's most notorious playboys. Duff was a confirmed bachelor, but when Ida announced she was pregnant, he agreed to get married, and the two were wed on October 21st, 1951. 6 months later, their daughter Bridget Maria Duff was born.
He told me, he said, "You know, I told your mother and I told everybody that I was not good husband material, and I certainly wasn't good father material, and I didn't want to get married. I knew my habits, and I had a lot of doubt about whether I could control them."
Ida knew marrying Howard was risky, but she was determined to make this marriage last. She was also determined to keep her career moving forward. Continuing to act and direct, by 1953, Ida was ready to embark on her most ambitious and difficult project to date. Having changed the company name to the more succinct Filmmakers, Ida wrote and directed The Hitchhiker, shot entirely on location with only a shoestring budget.
Smoke?
No. What are you doing, rolling?
Face front. And keep driving.
The Hitchhiker is a taut suspense thriller thought to be a classic of the film noir genre, characterized by dark shadows and a heightened sense of gritty realism.
Keep going!
She knew how to write a film, how to produce it, and how to direct it. She could get performances out of people. She also was able to demand respect and cooperation from a male crew. That wasn't an easy thing.
She was full of mischief, very intelligent, very funny, kind of bawdy. And she was laughing all the time, and she was physical. She'd hit the guys on the shoulder and stuff, and she was not at all a little mouse.
With the success of The Hitchhiker, Ida's directing was finally garnering more respect than curiosity. In her next film, The Bigamist, she added yet another landmark to the annals of film history by becoming the first woman to direct herself in a film.
Thanks.
Don't mention it.
If this is a sample of your work, you're not very good at pickups.
I know. I haven't had very much experience at it. This is the first time I ever tried to pick up a girl.
Oh, gee, that's too bad.
She was a pioneer for women. She made inroads for women. She never thought that was anything special. She never thought her talent as a director or being a woman trying something for the first time or a controversial subject or her acting was anything special. And that's exactly what was so special.
You know why I didn't sleep last night? I kept thinking about our marriage. You know, the way we got into it. It wasn't fair to you.
Don't say that, Phil. Never, do you hear me?
Please, take me home with you.
You really want me to?
Oh, yes. We need you.
Come on.
When The Bigamist fared poorly at the box office, Ida's cherished film company found itself in a struggle to survive. Adding to the pressure, she found very little support at home. Howard was frequently out of work since his blacklisting in 1950, and Ida was forced to support her family as well as her company.
She went to work. She supported us when my dad was out of a job, and it takes a long time coming back when you're blacklisted. My mother was willing to do anything and everything to help him, and she stuck with him. She took on jobs she didn't want to have to take. She spent nights at the studio without any sleep, and she was scared to death.
Howard's worst fears were realized when his drinking and infidelities led to constant battles. To make matters worse, he would leave for weeks at a time, sending Ida into deep depressions and uncontrollable mood swings.
I saw her enormous need to please him, which surprised me a lot, because I knew her as this very determined woman who knew what she wanted, knew how to get it, and suddenly it was as if she was deferring to him. And I had never seen that side of her before.
Ida performed regularly on TV's four-star Playhouse with friends Charles Boyer, Dick Powell, and David Niven. She also managed to write and produce Private Hell 36, in which she cast both Howard and herself. But the film was a critical and financial failure. Completely out of funds and unable to compete with the major studios, Ida was forced to close down her film company forever, marking the end of an era and the death of her dream.
Looking back on it, I think it was very hard. No one ever thought of the progression of going from an actress to a director or to producer. It was not seen. And there are great risks in doing anything that is not what the majority of the people in your field are doing.
Now 37 years old, Ida returned to the studio she had once turned her back on for work. Although she had proven herself as a director, she was crushed when it became painfully clear that their only interest in her was as an actress. She appeared in a few films before she was finally able to return to directing, although not for the big screen. Forging a new path for herself in the emerging television industry, Ida set yet another milestone by becoming the first female episodic director on series such as The Donna Reed Show. In 1957, CBS asked Ida and Howard to star in their own weekly television series. Although Lupino would have preferred directing, she put aside her own ambitions to work with her husband in Mr. Adams and Eve. Although the show aired for 2 seasons and earned Ida an Emmy nomination, it did little to help the marriage. Exhausted and frustrated by their constant fighting, Ida was beginning to break down.
She begged him a lot to quit drinking, and she says, you know what? You're just not going to quit. So if you think you can drink, you haven't seen anything yet. And overnight, she just became a full-on, raging, roaring pill addict and alcoholic.
Ida told me that was a very, very stormy marriage and the biggest mistake of her life. And she paid the price for that marriage. Not just financially, but emotionally.
As the decade that had started with so much promise came to a close, 41-year-old Ida Lupino had had enough. The same woman who had been a fearless pioneer only a few years earlier was now a woman whose life was spinning out of control, and it remained to be seen if she could put it back together. By 1959, Ida Lupino was working steadily as an actress and as a director in television. On the set, she was still the consummate professional, but behind the scenes, she was becoming addicted to pills and alcohol. When the news arrived that her beloved mother had been killed in an automobile accident, Ida was inconsolable and sank even deeper into her depression.
Her very best friend throughout almost all of her life was her mother. So when my grandma died, I don't think my mother really ever recovered from it. I think that was the last bastion of a sanctuary that was taken away from her.
That took an enormous amount out of Ida, and I think she took ways out that weren't the healthiest ways out. I mean, I know that she drank quite a lot.
Still only in her 40s, the once exquisite Lupino face was beginning to show the effects of her pain and suffering. But through it all, she continued to work. During the 1960s, she was one of television's most prolific directors, setting yet another record by directing over 100 episodes of TV's hottest shows. Finally, in 1966, Ida was given the chance to direct a big-budget studio film entitled The Trouble with Angels, starring Rosalind Russell and Haley Mills. The film was well received, but rumors were beginning to spread about Ida's drinking and eccentric behavior. In 1968, Ida and Howard put their troubles aside long enough to appear together in TV's Batman.
How do these pills work, Darky, baby? Are we really invisible?
No, Kabbalah, but we may as well be. You see, after taking the pill, we blend into the background so perfectly that no one can see us. Not even someone else who takes the pill. That's why we keep bumping into each other.
Well, husbands and wives are supposed to bump into each other now and then, aren't they, baby?
No, Kabbalah, cut the personal kick. This is business.
But in 1972, Howard Duff finally left home for good. Although the two had been together on and off for 21 tempestuous years, she never stopped loving him.
My mother had no idea of what this world or what the meaning of her life was about other than being defined as a performer, as a writer, as a director, and as being a woman that was loved by a man. So when the reality of that was shattered, everything was shattered.
it all just got too much. And at a certain point, she said, "The hell with it." And then she began to behave in a very different manner. And soon after that, she wasn't in such demand as a director.
Ida's life changed throughout the following years. Not only was she drinking, but she grew bitter and reclusive, losing touch with the outside world. By 1984, at the age of 66, Ida was incapable of taking care of herself. She voluntarily submitted to a conservatorship, choosing Marianne Anderson to run her estate and help her put her life back in order.
When I met Ida, she was like a grand bag lady. She was drinking. Everything was out of control. The house was a disaster. Her finances were a disaster. She needed help, but she was also too proud of a woman to ask her family or to ask what friends she had to help her.
The years of abuse had taken their toll. In the late 1980s, Ida was hospitalized when she suffered a series of minor strokes. When she returned home, she was sober and resumed a more conventional way of life.
She was trying to be a normal person at that time. She loved to go to little community basketball games in the neighborhood. She loved horseback riding. I think she was very happy in her final years. She'd still fight with the neighbors, but I think she was at peace with herself.
However, in June of 1995, Ida was diagnosed with cancer and told that she had 3 months to live.
She was sitting in her living room, and she glanced over, and there was a beautiful picture of her father, and she said, "Daddy, I hope I made you proud."
Ida Lupino was 77 years old when she died at her home on August 3rd, 1995. She had started acting professionally at the age of 14, appeared in over 60 films, and was a pioneer for working women both in front of and behind the camera. An untamable maverick with an indomitable spirit, Ida Lupino is truly one of Hollywood's legends.
I think she has been terribly overlooked. American Film Institute, I think they should have honored her years ago. Even an honorary Academy Award. I mean, she did excellent work.
She did what she did because she had to do it. That was the only way that she could really function. That's the only way that there was any reward inside this immensely questing woman, and she was.
I don't think what was current or what was in vogue or what people were doing was ever very important to her. She wanted to do it, and if she wanted to do it, she was going to do it. I mean, that was Ida.
My mother was a lot of things, but basically, inherently, before the pain and the personality or the addictions or the fear or any of that, she was a genuinely good and soft and gentle human being.